everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Monitor Keeping Podcast. I'm here again with Kai, and we're going to get into some really fun stuff today. We've got a great guest. You may have heard of him, Ron St. Pierre, so I'm really excited about this. First off, Kai, how you doing?
Hey, not bad. Probably better than you, though. Feel better than you, man. I'm actually glad I dodged getting sick.
Yeah, well, I'm over it now, but man, all the fires up here are just insane.
Oh, yeah,
everything
that too.
South Lake Tahoe is right on the edge there from the flames. So,
man,
I'm actually surprised I'm not working.
and now where you are you hit much by the from Ida, Ron?
Oh, me? No. I mean, it brushed us and it actually cooled us down. And right now we're getting like outer bands of it.
Yeah.
So it's been really nice for us. I mean, what it did to Louisiana was horrible.
Right. I'm not sure what it is for me, but the weather, like here, consistently for the last 2 years was maybe like 110 at this time, right? But the last few days have been 75, 77 degrees, a lot of humidity, a lot of forecast, and my monitors have been loving it. Slight rain, just enough rain, nothing too crazy, but just enough to bring the humidity up, probably even change the pressure a bit. But man, it's, I would say, a blessing out of nowhere, because I was expecting just blistering hot weather for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have the opposite problem. The rain screws me up here with breeding verandas outside, so I've had to. They're much harder to breed outdoors than indoors.
Yeah,
I mean, the outdoors you get the bonus of never having to clean, but you're at the total mercy of the weather. And where I live, basically when they really want to start breeding and it starts getting hot enough on its own, that triggers the daily rain and that drops the temperature. And so they start to get up to operating temperature, and then it pours and they drop to 78 degrees. And then if they're in the middle of the process of going through any sort of breeding or egg development, it just throws it all off. So I've had to make some very interesting changes over the last over this year, particularly I'm trying to get it to the point where they produce like they produce for you guys indoors.
Yeah.
Where you can reliably get eggs, clutches one after the other. I can't do that outside. It's just, when the weather's good, I do okay. And then when we get a lot of rain, it just jumps right off a cliff.
Now, what are you looking to stay consistent on the outside? Like, let's say you said that the rain messes you up, so you would prefer to stay just the hot and consistently sort of drier without the rain?
Yeah, I mean, what I did was counter to everything else that I have here, which all the other stuff, it's a battle to keep it cooler. And in some cases, actually get it wetter, like the anoles need a lot of rain and stuff like that. But the monitors, what I ended up doing was I covered everything, the tops in plastic sheeting completely to keep all of the rain from getting in there. And then part of the fronts, mine are in 8x8x8 outdoor enclosures. So I covered them so that no rain is actually getting in anymore. And then inside in the interior, they have a cool subfloor that they can go underneath, which is basically just a deck, a wooden deck that they go underneath. I can't get them out. They're completely. But what I did was I built a miniature plastic greenhouse inside the enclosures that they can go into, that gets 150 degrees when the sun's hitting it. I mean, I can stick my arm, if it can be 95 out, and I can put my arm in there and it feels like I'm putting my arm into a hot car.
That's awesome.
That's it's great ingenuity. It's just thinking way outside the box. It's like,
that was the only thing I could come up with. I mean, I was running out of options. I was getting pretty discouraged. I breed Ackies outside, and I have them in a large group in a large outdoor enclosure, and I get a couple of clutches early on and then nothing else. And I realized that it's the rain that just, as soon as it really starts to get hot enough, it just stops their production.
Yeah.
So I built it for those, and then I'm using it for the lace monitors and the Spencers and the Mertens. And I couldn't get the Mertens to go either. And then I set them up like that. I also installed these black plastic mats and put them in full sun so they get you can fry an egg on those things in the hottest part of the day.
Wow.
And they're using all this stuff. So I just gave them lots of options, and they started doing what they needed to do, and now they're all laying eggs, and the eggs are good. So it's still not as good as the indoor stuff, but it's close.
Do you mind me asking you what that temperature of that subfloor is down there?
It has a range. So in the wintertime, it stays pretty warm. So I don't use any kind of supplemental heating at all for any of the stuff we work with. So basically every enclosure has a subfloor, and then in the wintertime, I'll put 4 inches of cypress mulch on top of it, and they just go underneath there. Underneath there, it'll stay above 50. I know that for sure because I've temp gunned it when it was 32. Wow. And it was still like 54 underneath there. Nice. In the summertime, I would imagine it's probably in the 80s. I've never actually temped it in the summer, but I see them go in there only when we haven't had any rain and it's stupidly hot here. Like the last few weeks, it's been like 96 every day. So in the hottest part of the day, they are going under there and they're hanging out. So and then the back sides of my enclosures are also shaded, so they have. So like the 4x8x8 front is where I keep it the hottest, and then the back I allow it to get much cooler. Yeah. So they've got multiple zones, and they can go all the way up to the there's shelving all the way up to the highest points and big branches and stuff like that.
For me, with my heat here and how I kind of balance with that, so I didn't realize that they really needed that like a subfloor, and I don't actually have outdoor setups at all. They're just indoor setups, but in the coldest area, it's just a little it's where I set the water dish, but under that it's cool and it gets a good 65-70 degrees down there on its own, right? And it's now touching the floor that gets cold as well, because where I live in Southern California, it gets pretty hot. Yep. So typically we recommend people to lift it off the floor, but now I'm using the floor to actually suck out some of the heat that remains 80 degrees or higher, right? And so my females, they'll go through the whole process, but I realized I think it was just so much heat everywhere that they were getting stressed and then either reabsorbing or just the eggs would be bad, right? And so then once I added that 70-degree range availability on top of whatever else I was giving them, that's when my eggs would look so much better. And the females would be going through without a problem.
And you're talking the Indicus.
Yeah, just the Indicus, but the Kimberleys also have something similar too, where they have a cold pocket that they can get to in the cage. That's how I've tried to set them all up, where everything has an ability to get to 75 somehow. It's hard for the cages on top, and so I just heat them a little bit less, and maybe only random animals go up there, but my breeding groups stay down. Yeah.
Now, I want to get back into one of the reasons that I was excited and wanted to have you on, Ron, was because the problem solving and the stuff you're thinking of to adjust or adapt to your specific problems. And that's something we're trying to reach, like, to the whole nation or whoever's listening to the podcast about monitor keeping, is that certain things that work for one person or the person that wrote a care sheet aren't going to work for everybody.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I guess it's more like an instruction manual of how to think and how to adapt more than it is monitor, because it can be used across the board for so many things. But definitely, getting out there, using your brain and to solve your problems. But I guess before we go ahead, Kai.
No. It's like we're like a few minutes in, but I'm already mind blown that he shoved a greenhouse inside another enclosure and then all the other stuff too. It's like, I would have never thought that at all. You know? I would actually suffer, like he said, deal and basically at the mercy of the weather. Because I actually have never really kept too many things outside other than some tortoises, right? And those only for part of the year. Out here, I'm actually still trying to study the weather enough, because it gets, 110, 115 sometimes. And I just don't know how to really deal with that, other than providing more shade, but it'll still be so hot, and really I have to, like that, I haven't even absorbed that information yet. Or how am I going to apply apply 70 degrees when it's 100 outside. You know, that's hard.
Well, I can tell you this for sure. Actually, I shouldn't say for sure, but my experience at this point has been, and this has worked pretty much universally with, I don't even know how many species I've bred outdoors because I'm pretty generalist in my interest. I bred everything from amphibians and tortoises to lots of lizards and snakes. But I am primarily at heart a lizard guy, and I primarily worked outdoors almost the entire time. Although I do have a building and I've always had some indoor stuff, right? But the primary thing is it's not so much about specific temperatures. I see a lot of people get hung up on that. It's not really about that. What it's about is a swinging gradient and the ability to thermoregulate by moving up and down and back and forth. Like, I mean, if you think about it, you know, in the wild, they're not going to have at all times 75 degrees, and they're not going to have at all times, you know, whatever, 180 degrees, whatever the hot spots they're sitting on. So there's going to be a range. It's going to be spread out over time. Your goal is just to provide that ability for those temperatures, for them to, you know, get hot when they want to, get cool when they want to. And part of your situation, you know, for the most part is going to fluctuate anyway. Even if you're inside, when it's summertime, it's going to be a little bit warmer, even in a climate controlled room. And most people, the climate control is not so extreme that it actually keeps it at those low temperatures. Like the AC struggle when it's super hot, and when it's cold, that you'll get cold, you know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, back to the point you made about having the stuff on the ground. That was a lesson I learned the hard way very early on with outdoor stuff, because my first like commercial setup that I ever built to breed tegus was this tub system, huge tub system, and it was off the ground, so it was easy for me to manage. And tegus can take freezing temperatures, no problem, right? But this one particular year, I had, you know, 100, 150 babies left over in like early October, and we had an unusual cold front come through, and it only got to 55 at night. But because those tubs were raised and the cold got underneath where their bellies were, it killed like half of them. And I've never seen tegus die from cold. Like, I would leave mine out when covered in ice, and they'd be, you know, in their boxes under the ground where it was 50 some degrees. Yeah. Completely unfazed by it. But because their cages were raised and their bellies were on the ground, you know, there's something. I don't know exactly the mechanics of it all, but
it's the airspace, and it's basically allowing the heat gradient or whatever temperature to come through, actually. So
and their stomachs, though, in particular, seem to put them that's their vulnerable spot. Yeah, at least that's what it appears. So now everything I have is on the ground, and almost all my enclosures have subfloors, which gives them a second. So they basically have two layers. Yeah, and
see, that's to me amazing information. You know, if I ever get the chance to keep outside, something I'm going to definitely pay attention to, because I think, how am I going to do this if I ever, you know,
50 degrees is for most people is way too low, right? And in most teachings, and like, let's say when a beginner asks, what do I keep the cold side as? We typically tell them 75, even 80 degrees, but man, they can take some actually much colder temperatures than what we're aware of and what we're really practicing on the normal. Even just this last year, I had my male Kimberleys go down to 50 degrees. They were just in a cage in front of the window. That's all it was. Yep. That's all it was. And the rest of the room managed, but they got to bask for a little bit. I fed them very little, but they went to sleep at 50, 60 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, all of the lizard species we work with, including the lace, the Spencers, the Mertens, the Ackies, all the blue tongues, all of them are left outdoors year round with no supplemental heat, just the subfloor. Now, if it's going to be really cold, I do use 6 mil plastic to cover the cages and create like a greenhouse. And then I vent the plastic during the day, drop it at night, but the only purpose that really serves is to keep wind chill off. Yeah. So if it's 32 on the outside of the plastic, it's 32 underneath that plastic. Now the caveat is that even though they get down super cold at night, or can, in the morning, the sun comes up, hits the plastic. By 10 or 11 a.m., underneath that plastic is already in the 90s, and I have to start venting it. Once I vent it, it drops it back down to like 75-ish or so, but they can bask. So they're getting the sun. So as long as they can always, like if you put them in a room and kept them at 50 degrees, you'll kill them for sure for over 3 or 4 days. But if they have the ability to get warm if they need to, get cool if they want, and they go back and forth, they're totally fine. And that's a natural cycle for them. Most of Australia gets cold in the wintertime. Maybe just the very northern part of Australia doesn't really get, and even there, I think is still sort of Florida-like as far as temperature ranges, because they do have a gradient. It's not like totally, static equatorial kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm using that same plastic indoors, but what I've done preparing for this winter, and I've used it in different areas already in my warehouse, but I'm basically creating an Indonesian or tropical room by using 2 layers of the plastic, because I tried one and I get about 5 to 10 degrees difference right now, cooling one side of it and just messing around with it. But I found that if I use 2 just on this loft area, that I can trap the air kind of in between the 2, so it's not.
That's a good idea.
It's not losing air or not losing that much, because it's acting as that buffer.
Yeah.
And it saves me money using that air conditioner or the heating option on the air conditioner too.
And you guys just said you're using 6 millimeter plastic,
like the painter's plastic.
It's paint. Yeah. Yep, that's exactly what it is. You get it at Home Depot. It comes in 50 and 100-foot rolls. Yep. Okay. It's clear. It's kind of opaque. Yeah. It's called clear, but it's not truly clear. But yeah, that stuff, I've been using that stuff for 20 or 30 years now. It's just great. Every year I buy a shit ton of it in the fall and roll it out and have it on hand. And some years I don't have to use it.
There's a company, if you're going to use something indoors, I can't remember the name, but I'll get it for you. They make these poles where you can make like a dust room if you were doing something inside of a house reconstruction, and they actually have zippered doors, so you can cut just a straight line about 7 feet up, and they're it's like duct tape on one side for zippers, and you put it right on the lines, and that way you actually have a zippered roll-up door. Or the way I did it, you can just unzip one side and push through and zip behind you. So
that's so smart. Actually, I'm gonna pick your brain about that later, because in wintertime I want to have, when I have my my shade cloth up and stuff like that, I want to be able to protect that during the wintertime and just have the temperature not get so cold and block the wind chill. Okay, so I really wanted to get some of the logistics down on what you kind of do, like from when you start your day, and then not really everything throughout the day, but more so like when you're working with the temperature fluctuations and you have to buffer. So like, let's say when you're just saying that you're removing the tarps and things at that certain time, how often do you do things like that where you're going to have to pay attention, and it seems like you got a flow throughout the day where you're managing that, right?
I mean, that what we do is pretty much constant tweaking. Right. So it's like you can't, like, we don't leave for the most part. There's one of us is always here, and most of the time both of us are here.
Yeah.
And even if we have to go and like do Tinley or something, we have another professional herpetoculturist that comes and stays here, and then who understands all this stuff and manages it all. There's a guy named Eddie Soto.
I know him. Yeah.
So I have him, and he understands everything here, and he knows how to do it all. So, but my setup is unusual, and I mean, if I had the indoor space, or I was forced to do this indoors, you could set up a much more automated system and not have to do all the little stuff that we do. But the benefit that I get from that is that if everything's outdoors and the caging is very large, and you only have a pair or a trio at most you never have to clean it. It's like totally bioactive. All the wild insects take care of all the feces, and everything is just, and the rain and all that. So it lets us work with more than we would, without having to hire a bunch of employees, basically. So it's just the two of us, and between Heather and I, we can take care of, a couple hundred adults and a few thousand babies every year. So
now, the plastic that you use outdoors, is that also the painter's plastic? Or
yeah.
Okay.
No, I just go to Home Depot and buy that rolls of that clear shit, man. That's what I've always used. It works. I personally only need it to last through the winter.
Yeah.
By springtime, it's usually all shredded up from the winds and stuff. But but it's cheap, relatively anyway, and it's a good solution. It basically, and I use it to create domes over everything, right? I don't put like the sheets up. I actually make sure the pieces are big enough to completely go all the way to the ground and make like a bubble over all the enclosures. And then I just roll that up in the morning, and when the sun hits it, and the temperature gets above 49 degrees or so, which usually for us it's around 10 a.m.
How many cages are you doing with this?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand, because there's a lot of cages.
Yeah. We have. God, honestly, I don't even know, dude, how many adults of all the varying things we have here, but there's got to be around 300, 400 adults. So there's about 120 enclosures, roughly, big outdoor enclosures, and then there's all the anole thing, which is a whole other.
Yeah.
That's outdoors as well, and that's all on rolling wheels. Those guys, I'm just a little too paranoid to leave out in like super cold nights, because they don't hide in anything. They just hang on a tree. So those are all they're outside most of the year, but on really cold nights we roll them in. We have this 2,000 square foot building that we just roll them all into. So, and that's unheated. Its sole purpose is it stays about 55 in there. So when it's 30 in the 30s outside, its sole purpose is just to stop wind and keep the freezing off of them. Then they go back out in the morning, get sun again. So
you need one of those like they have on the pools that automatically roll up the pool cover.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Press a button and everything.
Yeah. If I was more technically savvy, maybe things would be more automated, but everything here is pretty much all. But the honestly, not having it automated though does kind of help you out a little bit, because it forces you to go out and see. And I have caught things that I probably wouldn't have caught. Like things that were going wrong, problems that I may not have noticed if I wasn't forced to go out there every hour or two and check on the stuff. So,
right. I think a lot of the beginners see the equipment that's available nowadays, and like, don't get me wrong, like some of them can be very beneficial. But some of them definitely take away the fun of stuff sometimes, like let's say even just with the automated misting system. Now, I mean, I guess if you had a ton of stuff and, spraying stuff with your hand is going to be tiresome. And even with an automatic sprayer, you'll have to go through quite a bit of that. But, when I'm there actually getting to spray them with my hand, and I get to, mist their mouth just on my own, it's a whole thing that I'm missing if I'm just having a whole Mist King run all the time. And I miss things essentially, like just like you were saying. So the fun of things, but actually missing certain, like, just as you're out there, you're forced to be out there. You're forced to go and, tend to things essentially, because you just can't let things be only automated. Luckily, it's just the lamps that I have automated, and, I have my nesting bins all heated well. But other than that, I still do a lot of things by regular love and labor,
Yeah, and that's absolutely the case. I've noticed over the years that guys that get in there and get their hand dirty and do the drudgery every day tend to do better overall than the guys that spend a ton of money, set it all up, and then just kind of barely interact. I mean, I do all hand misting. I've never used for that reason, mostly because it forces me to look at every single one every single day.
Multiple
And then
times.
yeah, exactly. And then if somebody's getting a little off a little bit, then I know, oh, okay, this one needs more water. This one's going to lay eggs, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Good
good
point.
thing is the monitors don't really need as much of that though, which is kind of cool. I mean, well, the bigger ones anyway. The little guys, it's probably a different story, but the lacer almost, I hardly do anything, honestly. I feed them. I make sure their water's full, but I have them all right outside the back. They're actually on the other side of that window behind me, and they're all right up against our house. So we sit on the porch, and you can watch them all, the lace and stuff, run around and do their thing. So it's pretty cool.
Now, yeah. I guess for the listeners, I want to go back real quick, and of course, Ron, I'm a big fan. Let me just put it that way, not to get too sappy on here. But you've been around a long time and doing a lot of things, and growing up with reptiles, your name it's popping up, or it would pop up on different things, and all the multiple species you've worked with, or bred, or magazine articles, or whatever, and you have kind of a unique name, so it's something that
people remember it,
right? It's one of those. So definitely, you've been around for a while. But for maybe the newer listeners that don't know who Ron is, we won't get into it so much maybe on this episode. But if you'll check out some of the episodes that NPR has already done. So we're not making you go back into, tell us about the first reptile you ever saw type of deal. I don't know how many times you probably said that by now, but
yeah, that's usually the opener on almost every podcast I've ever done.
Right.
Yeah, so, we knew that.
But I guess to that degree, talking varanids, what was your first experience with a varanid? Which species was that?
Shit. When I was like 10 or 11, I bought a Savannah monitor in a pet store.
Yeah.
And that kind of got me hooked. And then I've had them all over time. I mean, like I said, I've dabbled a lot. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Miami, so I was surrounded by all the import places. I was a anole. I dropped out of school when I was 16 to commercially collect anoles and iguanas and all this stuff that was loose down there. Right. And so I was supplying the pet trade with those, and it put me in all the import places, which then gave me access to all the reptiles from all around the world. And I just started all the stuff that I had grown up on reading about in books and stuff like that. It was now all I could get it for the most part. So I ended up making very little money and a lot, and I would always end up trading everything. I mean, I'd go in there and think, okay, I'm going to get enough, a week's worth of salary here for whatever I was doing. And I would always come home with almost nothing cash wise and all this other shit. And that included a lot of varanids, because there were some old Ditmars books that I grew up with that I found. There were these really old books that were in this library that I was constantly at the library when I was a kid looking at them. And I was like, man, one day I'm going to have that, and a rhino iguana, and a caiman lizard. And then by the time I was about 18, I had access to all that stuff. So I bought it all. And then, eventually I got into croc monitors in like the early 90s, mid 90s. And then I was able to get those to breed. And that really kind of solidified that I would always be working with some varanids of some sort after that. Yeah. So.
And I want to get into those croc monitors in a little bit when we're talking about maybe a different side of monitors with large monitors, actually, and the potential danger they can be. But for now, for what you keep or what you've kept in the past, is there a species that just does it for you? Is there a favorite among all of those?
Yeah, it's definitely the lace monitors.
Yeah,
they kind of fulfill both of that. I like shit that lives in trees. The arboreal, snakes, arboreal lizards, always been the thing that really, is kind of my primary interest.
Yeah.
So they have that. They're a giant, arboreal varanid. So they've got it's like having a Komodo dragon that lives in the trees, that doesn't get so big that it's not a nightmare to deal with. And the bells in particular, I saw them in a book on Australian reptiles when I was a
yeah.
kid. Thought for sure I would never ever own that.
Yeah.
Would never see them. And then when John Dragnet got those legal animals from I guess it was Germany that he got them. I don't remember, but it was a while ago. I remember seeing them at the show. They were way out of my price range, so I had to wait. Thank God, a couple other guys got them and were able to get them to breed, get them established, and now they're available for everybody. So
Yeah.
and now we have 7 adults, and I've got eggs in the incubator, and
Awesome.
I'm looking that though that's my Boland's python. That's the pinnacle of everything for me. And so when I got those, I built them the best set of enclosures I've ever had done for anything. I was just like, I want this right here, right outside my back door, where I can sit on the porch and just. So the whole thing is like 50 feet long and 8 feet wide and 8 feet tall. And
Living the dream, 100%. Yeah.
That's
it's
amazing.
awesome. Yeah.
It's funny. There's the 2 for me. If it's a tropical monitor, it would be the Gray's monitor. If it ever, if there's ever a chance. And then for the Australian stuff, you actually keep the one that I like the best. It's not the Parenti,
Spencers.
It's the Spencers. Yeah. There will be a day, but how are those? I saw a picture that kind of looked hopeful of a female. I think you posted not too long ago.
Yeah, they're not that those. So I have 7 of them now, 7 adult Spencers, right? But 6 of them were raised by other people, and there seemed to have been a disconnect. I think people had the typical Varanid mindset with raising them, and it seems to be problematic with them. They are like super prone to obesity.
Yeah.
And when I got them, they had these enormous fat rolls, and they had some problems. I've been working out, getting them healthier. I think they're good to go, and I expect to get at least maybe 1 clutch this season. But one of them, Brian Johnson, one of my backers, basically investor, he had bought this one as a baby, and he sent it to me pretty early, and he's like, this one's a male, go ahead and grow it out. So I grew that one out. I grew it out how I thought it should be done, very slowly, lots of insects, moved it up to chicks and stuff like that, a lot of eggs, but I didn't stuff it, and I didn't try to grow it up super fast. So it's taken 2 years. And it's just now about big enough to where I think it'll probably breed this year, but it's absolutely flawless. When I look at that one and look at the other ones, I'm like, okay, this is definitely they need like a lower calorie diet. You can't stuff them with a bunch of rodents.
Yeah.
They need a lot of heat.
Some exercise.
Yeah, and we put them in 16-foot long enclosures for that purpose, so that they have a long run. So they have, lots of long ground space, floor space, and they do utilize it. So they spend a lot of time cruising up and back.
Because I'm still looking at any information I can get on those, because I hope one day, I'll have the chance to work with them. But in the wild, it just seems like they're almost, there's like 3 to 4 months when they actually have food and water, and it seems like the rest of the year is just it's either way too hot, or they're like they look like skeletons waiting on a bunch of cracked dirt that's so dry, waiting for that rain to come. And in the wild, that keeps all that weight right off of them. Right?
Exactly, and that's the problem, is trying to manage that over time properly
without killing them.
Yeah. So my buddy Ewan Edwards is down there in Australia, and he actually went to where they were and sent me videos and photos of the land they live on. It's exactly like what you described. It looks like, he said, it's hell on earth. And then a portion of the year, I guess the whole thing floods. Yeah. So it's both super dry and cracked ground, and then it's completely underwater. Right. So it's like this really extreme place, and that's more than likely why they're so prone to obesity, because it's so extreme. They have to get what little food they can when they're just hardwired to eat, right? And then to make the most use of every calorie that they do get. So it's kind of
amazes me.
So I had a question on your now, to balance out the fact that there's still large lizards, sometimes insects don't always cut the cake, even with the 3 or 4 foot lizards. I myself use crawfish for my mangrove types, so that way they're not so obese. Because at one point I was just using a lot of rodents, right? And sure, it would send females into the whole process, but it'll just make them really obese right afterwards, rather than them being pretty lean. What was your, other than insects, or as well as insects, what else were you using to keep the Spencers healthy but lean still?
I mean, they're probably not as lean as they should be. I mean, even the one I raised is a little, but he doesn't have fat rolls. Basically, he looks like a well-fed, relatively streamlined monitor, and I just kind of, honestly, man, I rotate just all kinds of shit. We bring in so many different insect feeders here because we have all these different species. We bring in, we get hornworms every week. We have black soldier flies. We have tons of super worms, crickets, then frozen, pinkies, rodents, chicks, and then there's a variety of different commercial diets that I'll use. I'll use Repashy grub pie. I'll use, various cat foods. I don't feed any one thing in excess and kind of just throw a wide net of a whole bunch of different things, because it's really impossible to know exactly what they really need, as far as that and how good you're actually doing. So my thought is, well, if I give them a whole bunch of different things, then I'm bound to be closer to what, it's just a variety and moderation kind of thing.
Okay.
And when they start to get too fat, I just take them off food. I mean,
all right.
Yeah. So I only feed those, like that monitor only got fed every 2 to 3 days.
Okay.
I got one meal every 2 to 3 days. And right now, so for but let me back that up a little bit. So that was kind of like the maintenance thing. But when right now, when we're getting ready to go into basically their hibernation, brumation kind of mode, this month I feed them every day. They get fed hard. Everything here is being fed super hard right now, and will be until about the end of September, first week of October. Then I start backing off again.
Doing the same thing right now.
Yeah, I think we all do that, actually. Yeah.
This is when this weather is changing. I'm preparing my animals for basically their famine time. Temperatures are different. Food is a lot less. But I want to be able to make sure that they're super hefty, not really hefty, more so just really well fed going into the process. So, because I'm going to be leaning them down so much. Yeah. I think last year my monitors took end of December, so right around January, all the way up until April. And I just said, hey, no food or very little food, maybe like half of a mouse once a week or something like that. Maybe. Right. Yeah. It was just to when they're out, they're basking a little bit, and let's say they happen to be losing a lot of weight, I'll give a little bit of food, but it's not anything regular where it's like, oh, I'm gonna be feeding you consistently at all. Maybe every other week or once a week, if that,
Yeah.
I still let them bask. So I mean, I think some people take that whole hibernating and brumating thing. Maybe they misunderstand the whole process, right? We're not letting them cool like North American snakes exactly. I still allow mine to bask for several hours of the day. They definitely still have water accessibility, but they're not completely under. So it's just less of everything.
Yeah, I mean that, and actually I used to breed a lot of colubrids, and I bred colubrids the same way. I never ever hibernated them like that. So I was living in Miami at the time, and I had about 50 or 60 king snakes and corn snakes of all different mutations in this back bedroom. And all I did was in the wintertime, I opened the windows and I just didn't close them. And in Miami, most days are 78, 80, 85. At night, it'll get down in the 50s. That was it. I just took them off food and let them get whatever they did. And they all produced every year. And then I'd run into friends of mine, in other states. They're like, oh, I put mine in the refrigerator for 4 months. I'm like, okay, well, that works for you. That's cool. But I mean, they had a hard time wrapping their head around the fact that it wasn't necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think there's lots of ways to do this, but with monitors, with lizards, when I say they're hibernating, It just means that they're not off, that they're completely off food for several months while it's cold. And sometimes they stay completely underground for weeks at a time. Sometimes they're out every day sunning themselves.
Yeah.
And that pretty much works for every lizard species that we have here too.
Yeah. And for the listeners out there, this is important information that you watch your own animal.
Yeah.
Don't let your animal go through things, or you see changes in your animal, but you're sticking to a book or a care sheet that's out in front of you.
Yeah.
If you're cooling your animal and you start to see that it's breathing funny, mucus that you haven't seen before, making weird noises, then adjust, bring that animal back up. Something's wrong that you missed somewhere else. Don't leave it down there because so and so said so.
Correct.
Right. And because this is still something that not everybody knows about, to do properly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even myself, I've only picked this up in the last year or two, doing it well enough. Before, I was just kind of just cutting my monitors back on food and let the temperatures of California kind of do its own thing. And then when it got warmer, the animals did their thing again, right? But for anybody else, don't just take what we're saying and do it. Kind of try to work out the plays. It's going to be months of play. It's not done in 2 weeks. This is half the year that you're playing with. And so in everything, if you need to contact us to kind of walk you through what you're going to need to do on pattern changing and what to pay attention to, it is not just as simple as cooling them down. You're going to have to pay attention to your own weather. If you were to ask me, I would go through the temperature ranges for your year and then kind of pinpoint on when it would be best to do it in your area. It's just not as simple as what we're explaining right now.
Right. There's also, I know a lot of the carpet python guys will do it with certain species, but the king snake guys, where you don't just drop. So the listeners know you don't just drop the temps all at once. You bring them down gradually. You also got to pay attention to what's in their stomach, undigested meals, those types of things. So. If you guys want to know more about that, go ahead and message us, or there's plenty of information out there if you just look up cooling a carpet python. I know on the NPR podcast, the other shows that are out there's plenty good information that you can emulate, because a lot of these animals still come from the same areas too, so they're all being affected by this temperature drop or changes, and we can pull a lot of good information just from other species, all the info that's out there. So we are not saying just cut temps and this is the right way to do it. So.
It's a process. Literally, you're walking your lizards in through the process.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like I've been at this for 30 some years, and I learn new stuff constantly. It's a constant thing. Every year I figure out something new. Sometimes I completely tear down ideas that I've used for years. Yeah. I come up with something completely different, and I'll try it out.
Same.
That's not something you should probably do unless you have some experience, but you also, like you were saying, you can't follow. There is no playbook for this. It literally is different from person to person, from house to house, from location to location, from setup to setup. Every single variable changes the whole damn thing.
Yeah.
As I moved 3 times in 3 years recently until we finally bounced here, my production was complete shit. I went from outdoors to working out of a garage to then working out of a warehouse to then finally out on this big 5 acres property. And for those 3 years, it was a nightmare. I mean, it was very difficult to stay afloat, having to relearn everything, redo everything.
And it's adjusting.
Yeah, it's constant adjustment. Yeah. I think we tend to oversimplify it. I think people pick one thing, fixate on that, and then say, okay, this is a hard, fast rule. Mm-hmm. But the fact is there really are no hard, fast rules. It's going to completely be dependent on your even your lifestyle can have an effect. If you're somebody that's home all the time and interacting with the stuff, you're going to have a totally different experience than somebody that has to work 9 to 5 and only sees the animals at, early in the morning or at night, and all that stuff. All that stuff changes it all. So
working a job and then having to deal with, let's say, your regular family stuff or regular life stuff, right? And it really only puts how many real hours into what you want to do, which is breeding. And it takes a lot more than peeping in real quick. Sometimes it is very easy, don't get me wrong. It can be, but that's not all the time. Where you're gonna have to pay attention, change stuff up, and then adjust.
Yep.
Yeah,
I killed a Kimberly Rock female with this same issue we're talking about. I don't know where I put him in my head on a pedestal, and I received a clutch of eggs. And so in my head, I'm lucky. We're done. I'm just happy I got a clutch of eggs. And I had to go to work for, I don't know, forever during 2020. And she decided on herself to go ahead and go again with basically no support from me. And that didn't end too well. So,
it happens.
Yeah. Being hands-on and checking on your animals, especially lizards, any type of lizards. They're not snakes. They just work different. I envy the snake guys sometimes. They say they had a tough day. I'm like, oh, well, let's talk.
I only have to feed two times a month.
Yeah.
Having done both, I can definitely say there are days where I look around here and go, why the fuck am I doing this? I could just go back to doing snakes, and then I'd only have to, wouldn't have to think about it, all the stuff. Lizards definitely are. They're definitely more. They're more intensive as far as you get a lot more out of them, though. I mean, a snake sits in a, I mean, I like snakes too, but they're just not as interactive as like lizards and stuff.
You don't the day to day, you got to eat almost every day, or they're always out and about. Snakes kind of stay tuckered in little spots sometimes, but
and the snakes don't really come to you like when I go outside and the monitor, they come, the laces particularly come right up to you, and they'll take chicks out of your hand and stuff. Snakes, they're just they're just a very singular minded predator.
I asked myself, if it wasn't varanids, what would it be? And I'm just looking at other lizards, and I just can't. I couldn't do it. Maybe I just stick with Adatria and just not do any bigger stuff when I'm much older.
I love the look of disgust they give you when they realize you don't have anything for them, and it's like that turn away and look over your shoulder like, you peon. I have no respect for you.
Yep, that's totally true, man.
Yeah, and Eric Burke's going down this path right now with.
I saw that.
Yeah, which is funny because another host of a show, Riley Jimison, I was telling him I came up with this kind of plan of how to destroy NPR, and I was just doing it out of fun. But step one was to get Eric some monitors, and then step two was to get him. The holy grail of dwarf monitors, the Kimberly Rocks, which he's got, or they're coming, and it's just like, oh, it's all crumbling.
He's gonna have less time.
The monitor, I don't know, podcast radio or something soon enough. So
one day you'll log into Morph Market and all his carpet pythons will be up there.
Right.
A lot of guys end up that way. A lot of guys, they're like, hey, I got my first monitor, and then bam, they're hooked. I think what they were wanting out of the snakes possibly, and some people are different. Some people love the fact that they don't have to tend to the snakes so much, but some people, they want the reward, and that's a fun lizard. I mean, it's cool. It's interactive. It's like a dog almost, and I think just people go from having a ton of snakes and then getting rid of all of them and jumping into their first set of monitors. And
I mean, honestly, varanids they are the lizard version of the chondro emerald tree boa kind of thing, where people that get into them really get into them, and because they're not very suited for like beginners and people that don't spend a lot of time researching. Varanids require a lot of research to really do them properly, and chondros and emeralds are the same way. You don't really see any casual guys keeping chondros. You don't really see any casual herpers keeping monitors either, for the most part. I mean, the pet trade ones, the savannas and stuff like that, you see that like the kind of an entry level. But I mean, most people that keep Odatria, most people that keep any of the Australian varanids, and most of the Indonesian ones, they're pretty hardcore about this stuff. So
they're already looking. If it starts with Ackies, they're already looking towards that next project.
Yeah, exactly.
Who would want to be shitted on every day?
Yeah, exactly.
I have to like my lady's like, why do you change clothes so much every day? It's like, yo, I just got shitted on again,
Right.
and I have to shower now again. It's already been like, and it's only 4 o'clock, and I've done my stuff, and yeah, sometimes I mean, some people already know this, but I go into the room just bare boxers, or that way they don't. If they shit on me, it's on the skin. I get to hose it right off. Just hose it off.
It's
Very accurate.
Though.
Yeah, it
Trying
is.
to get it out of the holes in your Crocs shoes, though, is.
I was gonna say, man, more of my van. I have like 5 pairs of fucking checkered Vans, and all of them have shit stains on them from a freaking Spencer's or a Mertens. Just I pick them up to move them, and they always hit you in the shoes.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, you fuckers.
We'll try to collab with maybe we'll get Vans with Gore-Tex for the
right.
Rinsable shoe.
Right.
Let me spray some Scotch Guard on there.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Great times as a keeper. We're really, we're trying to hold it in here, Ron. But we've been excited about having you on.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, but nothing to be excited about, man.
No, it's the information alone. Like it's we get loved by the whole community, and that's one thing. But what you have to bring to the table, thank you for being able to just like the outdoor things. I don't think many people get just how complicated that shit is, and then to apply it, test it out on animals that cost $10,000-$20,000. It's like I would test it out on Olympicus, but it's like I'm gonna want some tried and true stuff, and you're able to really put it out there with how you can really think outside the box for the current box that you're working on.
Right. I mean, to be fair, 20 years ago, I never would have made attempts like this. Like I would not take any breeding loans or anything I was constantly in the mid 90s when I really started making a name for myself, getting offered, all this shit that I always wanted. People were trying to put it on loan with me to breed, but I was too scared to take it because I was afraid I would kill, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to hurt anybody else financially. So I wouldn't touch it. But as I've gotten older and I've gotten more confident with how this all works, and I've had everything thrown at me from multiple hurricanes back to back to, crazy dips where it got super cold and there was then super hot. So I know how to navigate it now more or less. So I know where the lines are that I can push it. And then I can see the stress coming up. So as soon as if I'm trying to push something to find the sweet spot, and I see I've gone too far, I can usually read it in the animals, and I immediately back it off, and it rectifies the problem. So, but if I didn't do that, I don't think I would have been as successful as I've been and able to maintain it anyway for, I mean, it's going on 30 some years. So
yeah,
it's kind of it's risky, but you kind of, but I went into this, what I'm trying to say is I went into this slowly. I tend to spend a lot of time researching before I actually do anything. Like most of my day is spent reading, even today. I mean, I have interest in all sorts of scientific fields that I like to read that stuff because I'm looking a lot of times just for things that I can apply to this. Yeah. Like I've taken a lot of ideas from aviculture, from aquaculture, from botany. I mean, I've looked at all of those different, disciplines, and I've stolen pieces that I could apply. So, and I have friends that have fish, fisheries and that are bird guys that have all these parrots, and we talk, and every once in a while somebody will say something and a light bulb will go off, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the same problem I see in this thing, and they already worked it out and they have a fix for it, and then I'll find a way to make it, apply it. So I
love that. Yeah. I have a buddy who does bird stuff. He's kept reptiles too, in bred reptiles, but he was seeing a problem with some, I think, hornbills or something, and they weren't nesting right. Couldn't get in the nest, but he found out that he needed to whatever type of bird it was, I'm getting this wrong. You know, he needed to add in, I guess, some type of like almost dirt and mud that the birds could pack around the opening of the nest or the nesting hole for access. It's like they needed to go through this tradition or this ritual to use it. And so I love that he noticed that, and other people that notice a problem and can adapt and think outside the box. I try to keep them kind of close because I'm like,
so do I.
Yeah, you know how to think. Yeah, I might have an issue, and you might be like first 5 people I'm reaching out to, you know, and I think that stuff's important. So, you know, the stuff you've had to do and had to even right now are adapting to keeping this stuff outdoors. Just was like, yes, I can't wait for this to happen. But I know, like you said, there's 30 years plus behind this type of having to figure things out on the fly, including being at the beginning of a lot of some of these species to begin with. Like no one knew how to keep things. So I'm sure there's a pile somewhere of the rest in peace animals, you know, that some of this was built on. And that's not just true for you or for us.
No, yeah. I mean that honestly, I was able to kind of mitigate most of that, but because so guys like me and Alan Rapace, we're both in our 50s. We came up kind of after like guys like Bob Mayhew and Bill Love and those guys already built the foundation. And they actually have, you know, obviously predecessors before them, but Philippe de Vaugelet, Bob Mayhew, that whole thing around the Vivarium magazine, me and Alan were part of that. So we had a huge body to build off of. So, you know, he went his direction. There was a lot more of us. Alan's just a good friend of mine, and that's who's coming to mind at the moment. But, you know, we had a good foundation. Vivarium magazine was incredibly influential. I think it was probably had the biggest impact on me as far as a herpetoculturist, the stuff that, you know, even the philosophical angle that Philippe de Vaugelet would write articles on, you know, how to think about doing this, you know, the way it should be done, you know, being thoughtful in what you're doing, all that stuff, that really made a big impact on me when I was young. And I think my entire my group that, you know, came up at that time, and all of like you guys and everybody after, it's all kind of trickled down. I think we all kind of were given a huge boost up because of that magazine, because of those guys, and they had a much better thought process, especially the California guys. I grew up in Florida. To be honest, I was kind of a odd man out down here. There were a few hardcore breeders and herpers, but it was mostly importers, a lot of, you know, just kind of animal dealers kind of thing. Particularly in Miami at the time, there was a handful of herpers, and you'd see them at the herp clubs and stuff. But it wasn't like California, like especially that San Diego area produced a lot of like really groundbreaking, amazing guys. That was definitely the scene. And I actually, if I could have afforded to, I would have sold and moved out there. But when Alan flew me out there in the early 90s and out to La Jolla, and I was looking at the house prices.
Wow.
Dude, there's no way I can.
That's crazy. That's La Jolla Beach is the beach to my hometown in San Diego as well. So that's really hard to say that. Yeah. That's
I love it out there, man. It was cool, man. He was living up on his hill and you could see the ocean, and
It's a great thing.
Hurricanes.
You know, I hear people talking about Southern California. I did get to live up in the mountains just above San Diego and LA. There's a range of mountains, and
that's me.
Yeah. And honestly, out of all of the U.S., and I have the Audubon Society reptile book, you know, so I've studied where things are since I was a kid.
Yeah, me too.
But Southern California to me is just got a special place in my heart. You know, just it's the one place I think, unless I'm missing, that you can find in those same mountains, you can find rubber boas and rosy boas in the same day. And it's absolutely amazing. Blows my mind where you can find a mountain king snake and a desert king snake, you know, in the same day. And for that reason, and there's still things out there that, you know, I might say, well, that's some kind of side blotch, patch nose, whatever it is, but I have never seen one that color, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of amazing. So I know everybody has their own thing, but that's, you know.
No, it's great, man. Like I was able to go to the Mojave and look for grasshoppers when we first started, right? And I found a tree frog in the Mojave.
That's weird. Yeah,
I was like, yo, this is a river that is flowing through. And then I found a tree frog, and I was just, this is dope. This is like, you know, you never really see that. And where I'm at in this part of California, I guess there's so many ranges that basically overlap, right?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? It's just so many different ranges that are basically right around this San Gabriel Valley ridge. And man, there's a lot of great stuff around here. I'm actually scared because the mountains are so huge compared to what I'm used to in the Bay Area. We got little hills compared to these things here. And, you know, they're even now, or not now, but even in springtime when it's really heavy, the snow is still up there for a while. That's how tall the mountains are now.
Yeah.
And you know, I found out there's things you can only see like when certain storms hit. That's the only time they come out in those mountains. Salamanders in the desert, you know, just crazy stuff. You could only the red leg frogs that are protected up there. And I tried to get this information out at the time. I guess I'll say it here on the Monitor podcast. But there were these storms that would hit, and right as the clouds are out there in the desert and you feel the humidity, and it was right around going up the mountain, right around the 3,000 foot level in elevation, there was a runoff creek that was right next to one of the highways up there. And when the storm would happen, and sometimes it didn't happen for 3 years, you know, you'd go a couple years so conditions were right. The whole road for, I mean, a mile in one way and a mile another way, because that stretch is pretty long. It's not that long, but the whole road would be covered with these frogs. And I'm thinking to myself, not to upset anybody, but are these things really endangered, or are we just not looking for them at the right time? Because I mean, it looked like something out of the Bible at that point, where
who can see
switched and doing the Terminator crawl, you know.
I know they do surveys, but no one's looking at the whole landscape, like the whole thing, you know. So it's what they see in record numbers or whatever throughout the years, and they're gonna guess. I guess it's probably just a real guess, you know.
Yeah.
No, I mean that honestly, that's for sure. A lot of the species are just so cryptic that people just don't know. They're all. I mean, look, it wasn't that long ago they rediscovered the freaking crested gecko, and now the damn things are. And I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Hoplodactylus delcordi, but it's like the world's largest gecko. There's only one specimen that was collected in the 1800s. That's in a museum, right? It's this giant gecko. No one knows where it was actually definitely collected, and nobody knows anything really about it, and it's determined to be extinct. Well, how the hell do you know that it's extinct if you don't know where it was collected? And if it was collected in New Zealand has gigantic forests. Yeah. And, you know, I realize that this gecko is like 2 to 3 times larger than the biggest Leachianus, which that's a big gecko. But if it's a treetop crown giant, like the anoles have these crown giants, these giant anoles, and they basically live up in the crowns. They only come down when they absolutely need to, but they're diurnal, and that makes them easy to find. If you've got a crown giant gecko that's nocturnal, and it lives in stumps, you know, in knot holes way at the tops of these giant trees in this old forest, what are the chances that anybody's going to run into those?
Yeah.
Right.
Especially in a place like New Zealand that's not being heavily deforested.
Yeah.
So it's probably still there. I mean, how badass would that be to go find that thing?
Well, it's funny. Some of the people that might be worth talking to is New Zealand has a lot of guided hunts for red stag, and there's these I can't remember the name of them. They're a type of sheep or something that are
yeah.
And some of the stuff that, you know, my buddies would tell me they would see over there, because one of them would guide over there, and he's trying to describe it, and I'm basically like, draw a picture for me, you know.
Take a picture.
Well, they're only worried about what they're there for, and not the rest. It doesn't matter to them, you know.
Correct.
In like the fly fishing guys, because some of the trout, it's like world renowned trout fishing over there in New Zealand, and so
Really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so they go to these remote places, and they even sneak up on the water in a certain way and everything. And while they're looking around to tie their flies or match them to whatever they're seeing around them, you know, my buddy said it was like being in the Geico Gecko tryouts or whatever.
Right.
You know, casting is what he said. I said, well, what were you seeing? I don't know. You know, he wasn't worried about that. So, yeah, I think there's. I'm convinced there's a dwarf Argus somewhere in Papua New Guinea, and I want to see it.
Wouldn't surprise me. No, I mean, it really wouldn't. There's so many. Look, Indonesia's got I don't know how many thousands of islands,
right?
And they find new shit all the time.
Yeah,
like even the last 20 years, they found a handful or more of different monitor species, and that's not including all the other stuff. And back when imports were very common and you could go through these mass shipments, I used to find stuff in there that was clearly different than what it was supposed to be, you know, being one off, and you wouldn't even know really what to do. Sometimes there was a guy named Mark Bayless who was a friend of mine, big monitor guy.
Oh, yeah.
So
we know him.
Yeah. I would take photos of, you know, like weird, especially the Indicus complex. There was a lot coming in out of the Solomon Islands at the time, and I was finding these Indicus-esque things.
Yeah.
And I would take photos of them and send it to Mark, and Mark's like, I don't know what the fuck that is. That doesn't fit any. Yeah. So we would find that, and there'd just be one here and one there. So I never really bothered to pursue it. And when those Molinas came in, there was different Molinas. There were pink ones. I saw bright orange ones. There were different things just within that group. So I don't know whether.
Yeah. No, you said bright orange, and actually Kai is holding on to something for me right now. That's
it's just a really flame black. It's like a Dorianus with a completely orange back. It's incredible.
A turquoise tail. The thing,
but it came in like a typical looking Dorianus, you know, but it had the typical black and white spots. But man, it ended up being something very, very spectacular. This just kind of one off from all the other pastel orange spots that came in or whatever. I myself lost in the Indicus stuff.
So I mean, there is a thing too. Like with the giant anoles, I work with 4 different species, right? If I took the hatchlings of those 4 species and put them all in one enclosure together, I could not tell you what was what. They're identical. But then as they mature, they become clear that they're, you know, what they are.
What they are.
But, I mean, in imported hatchlings, you could be seeing the same effect in some of those species that are closely related but have a wide range.
Right.
You know, so I mean, I don't know, man. There's a lot of there's so much more out there than I think most of us kind of. We think we've seen it all. They found it all. Not even close.
No, not at all.
Yeah, not even close.
So somewhere in the world, there's pink Molinas running around the jungle, up in a tree.
Right.
And whoever lives in that area, if there's someone, they know about them, but to them, they're just that pink lizard that runs.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, I mean, all the New Caledonians knew that Rhacodactylus ciliatus, or whatever it is now, Coralophus. So they knew they were all over there, but we thought they were extinct. Yeah. And I remember, I think it was Henkel that found the first one, but he sent a photo to, I think it was it's Strictly, one of those places, and they showed me this picture of this thing, and I was blown away. I couldn't believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, they refound, and it didn't have a tail, you know, and it was just this weird, you know, this was formerly extinct, and now there's more of them outside of New Caledonia. I mean, I've got a building, a freaking room full of them myself.
Yeah.
So they're just, I mean, they're everywhere. But it's weird to go out there and see something that was once considered extinct, and it was right there in front of everyone's face the whole time.
Yeah.
Exciting though, but it's maybe just ignorant on our part.
It's just the right person It just has to be the right person at the right time.
Yeah.
And there's really not that many of us that are so freaking nerdy about this shit that we would go on a vacation somewhere and then see something, go, oh, that's not in any book, and I don't think that's, or that's extinct. I know what that is. I mean, how many people would, would actually know that?
Maybe listening to this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Man,
Exactly.
If I went to
there's not a lot of
Indonesia, I would die that first week.
Right.
I probably get sick from the water or something like that, not listen,
Yeah.
or end up like slipping off some low cliff because I thought I was like, gonna catch something.
Yep.
That'd be me. Yeah.
I think that'd be all of us.
Yeah. Or getting a bite from something and
yeah,
for sure.
Scared to touch things.
Yeah. I think about that too with the Komodo dragons. How many people are over there and your focus is on this huge lizard walking around you, or groups of them.
Yeah.
But who's looking in the trees at what else is there and looking down at you? This whole thing going on,
Yeah, exactly.
Species that have maybe gone nocturnal to stay safe from being eaten, but are, I guess, diurnal during the days, but they don't move off those trees until the sun sets. And then
I guess speaking about large lizards again, do you still have crocs at all?
No, not anymore. I mean, I was about to go back into doing them again, and then the lace monitor project came up. It was awesome. I got offered to a breeding loan for a group of adults, and I was like, well, that's what I've always kind of wanted, and I kind of already been there, done that with the crocs. So, and Crutchfield was working on him, and I was talking to him. He was asking me, a lot of questions about back when I bred him and stuff like that. So I was in contact with him a lot, and he's the one that really kind of got my interest into doing them again, because I hadn't thought about him in a while. And I was like, well, I'm kind of stable now. Maybe I should, it'd be cool to hatch those again. But the lace thing came up, and then so I was just I had started to pick up crocs, and then I just went ahead and sold them off, and I wanted to focus on only 4 varanids, because varanids, like we were saying earlier, they're a handful. They require, an amount of attention. If you notice, no one that's really successful with them has 40 species or anything like that. They have 5, maybe 10 species at the most, and they're usually really successful with them. Most people work with 2 or 3 and are really good with them. So I picked 4. Heather wanted really to work with Ackies and kind of use them because she really liked them, and she wants to lower the number. We basically live off of bearded dragons. That's the primary thing. We produce around 4,000 a year. So that's what pays the bills and keeps us everything going. And then, so, she wanted to kind of move over to doing less, but better stuff, so she wanted to work with the Ackies, and we've got a nice group of red Ackies. But other than that, I got the Spencers, the Lace, and the Mertens. They were all kind of part of the same initial package. This Ryan Johnson, a friend of mine, he had bought these, and so he was like, hey, you want to take these on loan, see what you can do with them? And I was like, all right. So yeah.
So
I don't know how Alan does it. Alan's got a lot.
I just run around and throw roaches in cages like Cheerios.
Yeah. A couple things, and I can barely manage. Yeah.
It's a decision. It's just like, okay, and I almost have to prep my thought process for it. But it's kind of in a mode now until we go into winter. But But Ron, are you working with any of the albigs, white throats or black throats?
I was, but I recently, again, when we got the lace, I was looking at those, and so I ended up selling. I still have a absolutely massive pair of black throats, but I recently worked out a deal with a zoo, and they're going to the Virginia Zoo soon. Dennis McNamara is over there, and he wanted them for an exhibit. So I was like, all right, they're going to a good place. These are absolutely gigantic ones, man. Everyone that's seen them says they're the biggest. The male, anyway, is the biggest one they've ever seen. Yeah. And I can barely move that thing. So when hurricanes come, that's more than anything, though. That was the real reason. I don't really want anything any more bigger than a lace. Lace are easy to move. They're big, but they're light, and they're but a 70-pound dragging around a 70-pound blackthroat and trying to get it out of the enclosure and get it into when a hurricane comes and get it into a box and get it into a building is just.
Yeah.
So and then when you have a bunch of them and you're trying to deal with all this other stuff, it's just too much. So
yeah,
I was like, all right, I got the big Varanid that I wanted, and I'll work with these medium size. The Spencers are nice because they're medium size. The Mertens are the same thing, and that's the size I kind of at this stage kind of really like. I'm kind of tired of dealing with monsters, but
3 foot and below.
Yeah.
You say medium size, but I guess it's all relative to if you've kept and bred croc monitors, it's like, oh, this is a small guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the blackthroats are like honkers. That's just the head is like this big alone.
Yeah. They eat out of house and home. I mean, they're the food bill for those things is more than 7 lace just for the pair.
It's just how much they can consume.
Yeah.
Comparable to, like, let's say across the board, not all monitors are just this, like, they're not just heat them and feed them, or you can't pound them all. You know,
absolutely.
Yeah. There's some that can eat like crazy. Like, let's take Argus for example. Right? They're basically garbage disposals.
Yeah.
But my Indicus, I couldn't even take a half of that diet and feed it to that animal once a week. To my Indicus, it's just they don't even want it. After 2 or 3 bites, they're okay.
That is the thing that I see a lot. Is I think everybody, not everybody, but I think a fair size segment thinks that water monitor dynamics apply to all Varanids, and or even Aki dynamics apply to all Varanids, and it's not the case. They're each one they're individual, and there are some basic things that are somewhat applicable across the board, but they are definitely, you need to look at the species individually and see, exactly what the mechanics of that animal is, and then adjust appropriately. So
And I guess going into the next thing, I kind of wanted to touch on with you, Ron, having that experience with the larger monitors, and pretty much, I would say the most potentially dangerous monitor that we can actually have access to in a croc monitor. You have to be on your game as far as behaviors, as far as watching the animals, and even with, a lace monitor is big enough to do some damage. But we can't treat these things like Ackies. You can take a bite from an Ackie, it might hurt. I've had some bulldog me, but it's not. Yeah, it's not going to be life changing. And some of these bigger ones, even a bite from the big albigs, the blackthroats, could potentially affect you years down the road. So working with those bigger animals, do you have certain precautions you take, or is it just getting to know your animals, or how do you approach that?
I probably do things that I'm not even really, I kind of subconsciously do without really noticing. So, it is more reading the animal. You can tell. Like I don't really interact directly with the biggest stuff here when they're at peak operating temperature. Like if I'm going to feed them, I feed them just an hour before they're going to hit that really, thing, because even super tame, they're when they're at operating temperature, they're predatory, instincts kick in to some degree. Even if they're super aggressive feeding, it's easy for them to make a mistake. And if they make a mistake, it could potentially send you to the hospital. So I've managed to avoid that the entire time. Now I don't work with croc monitors anymore. The only reason I really stopped was because my ex-wife kind of pushed the issue, because I almost got bit in the head by a 9.5 foot one that was tame, but that had less to do. Really, in retrospect, it was because it was 2 or 3 days prior to the Daytona show. It may have actually been the day before. This was like in 2000 or 99. I can't remember. But anyways, a bunch of people were down. They wanted to come over, so I let them come over, and I had them all there at once. Rather, nowadays when I get visitors, I trickle everybody out. If you want to come down, you got to let me know ahead of time. I got to know you somehow, and I only have 1 or 2 people over at a time. There's no groups anymore. But I had a group there that day. It was like 8 or 9 people, as I recall. And I was in the enclosure with this thing showing off. It was a 9.5-foot male. I had hand fed this thing for years, never had an issue. And I was in the enclosure. I had fed it, and I was talking to the people. And I noticed, and I heard the side of the chain link fence enclosure rattling, and everybody's face was looking at me like, "Oh shit!" And I looked over, and he was right in my face with his mouth open, and I had to grab him and stop it. He wanted me out, and I think it was kind of he had all those people there he didn't recognize, and I think it just kind of set him off. It was a hot day, if I recall correctly, and it was, so he was probably at full operating temperature that day, which is a term I kind of stole from Jeff Lem, because Jeff worked with them as well, and Jeff knows that those big monitors, when they're at full temperature, they're a different animal. It's just the way it is. I mean, I know they're tame and they're trustworthy when they're not, and they probably are for the most part still trustworthy even then. It's not the fact that they're untrustworthy; it's the fact that if they make a mistake, just like a dog can make a mistake. If a Chihuahua makes a mistake, it's a whole different game than if a Mastiff or a Pit Bull makes a mistake. And it's the same kind of thought process. So when I've been critical of people that I've seen taking 6-7 foot croc monitors to shows and letting the public touch them. I mean, okay, that's fine. It's tame. I get it. But if some little kid pokes that thing in the eye, or for some reason it gets spooked, and it just, they just have to barely nick you to do catastrophic damage. They are not in the same league as all the other Varanids. And I've been bitten by lots of shit over the years. Like I had my calf crushed by a Tegu. It was a big Tegu. But and those things are when they're indoors, they're great. They make good pets. They're another thing. You put them outside though, and they're at full operating temperature, they fly at you with their mouth open. and to get food, and everything to them is food. So
right.
So it's the same kind of thing. It just makes me nervous. The only reason that those people get away with taking those croc monitors and doing that at those shows is because it's cool in those shows. So that lizard's not at operating temperature. If it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to pull that off. Right. And so if you can't pull it off when they're at operating temperature, you shouldn't even. That's my thought, my feeling anyway, is that it's an unnecessary risk that would give us incredibly bad PR if just some rando got nailed by a croc monitor at a show. It would just be bad.
Agreed. So, some of the first shows I went to, I remember there was the little Caymans on people's shoulders and stuff. They were talking, I think early 90s.
Right. And I mean, that kind of dumb shit, it's dumb, but I don't think that's necessarily, it's not good, but it's not like it's just the thing with the
it can be bad.
Yeah, right? Exactly. With the croc monitor thing, I have friends that have been bit by 5-foot ones that suffered catastrophic damage, that had to have reconstructive surgeries. Mm-hmm. Crutchfield got nipped on the thumb and wound up in the hospital for a week. Yeah. And he got a nip. The first one I ever hatched, I was so excited that I ripped the lid open on the incubating box, and I just reached in and grabbed this fresh hatchling, and it just turned around because I scared it, and it was slippery, and it just barely grabbed my finger, and I didn't even feel any pressure, and the blood was just squirting out of it. It cut me from one end to the other. It looked like I took razor blades and sliced my own finger open. So when I saw that, I was like, these guys. So that was fresh hatched, so 7 feet long with a fully equipped set of dentition. It's not worth the risk. They're just not that kind of a pet.
Yeah. Even my 3-foot guys, I still gotta, we talk about size, but there are little guys that can do some damage to you.
Yeah, for sure.
The Indicus stuff, they're basically equipped with talons, even if they're small, right? They're like hook talons compared to like a Dautria nails or an Argus nail, quite different. And so, I still had to pay mine quite a bit of respect. I really don't clip their nails because I need them to be functioning, climbing, and doing what I think they need to do without falling and breaking a leg. Yep. But, when they're out, I really have it pretty quick. We get to bond a little bit. but I'm no longer draping my monitor all over me anymore like I was when I was an immature kid. I really try to really put that respect in my presence as people are seeing me with these animals, representing these animals, because I kind of now represent Indicus as almost a whole for a lot of people trying to breed them. And so, I want to do right by them, right? And so, I can't just tell people, hey, this is what I do with my guy. Look, it's great. It's a pet. I'm just stroking it. I do give them a sense of, hey, my animals can be tolerable and tame, but it's not like what you think. It's just something that you work and you put in work for. It's not going to be just given to you. I can sell you a captive bred stuff, but even that animal can be wiry too if you never work with it the right way. And so I really try to get people to understand, man, these little 3-foot things can do some damage to you, can, send you to the hospital, give you stitches, really hurt you bad. I took a bite from a juvenile, like maybe sub-adult Dorianus, and that's my worst bite ever. And I still feel that in my finger when I look at it now. Yeah. When I look at it now and I look at my finger and I look at this scar now, and that lizard was barely 3 feet. Barely. And it gave me the bite. I was basically crying trying to get it off my finger, and just in agony afterwards. It's just not worth it. We want people to really be respectable of these animals too,
Yeah. I mean, the worst bites I ever had, one of them was a 3.5-4 foot green iguana that had mouth rot.
Oof.
Yeah, I still have no feeling in this finger to this day. It ripped the end of it off, but it was just kind of hanging. And it was just before like a show. I think it was the Daytona show actually, when it was in Orlando. And I have an aversion to going to the hospital, so I probably should have, because it was just hanging. But I was like, "Fuck this!" So I got duct tape and I taped it up. Then it got infected as hell. And I'm at the expo, and there's a red line starting to run down my finger.
No.
I had to call a buddy of mine and get some antibiotics, and I started taking antibiotics while I was at the show, and the whole thing was throbbing. Oh, it was just terrible, man. It was one of the worst decisions I can recall making. But
I'm killing it at the show. I'll wait till that red line gets up to my doorstep.
I'm being killed at the show.
Yeah, pretty much. And another one was by a big tokay gecko. It was in I saw this massive tokay in this telephone pole. They have this like metal rod that goes around, near the bottom of the pole, and there was a hole in the top, and I could see a huge tokay in there. Like a dumbass, I reached my arm in there to grab it, and it grabbed me. And then I couldn't get my arm back out because it was holding on.
This is in Florida?
Oh yeah, it was. It was right down the street from there were tokays like everywhere where I used to live, and and I finally get my arm out with the gecko attached. It was massive, but it tore the end. Like my finger was all jacked up. There was blood everywhere. It was one of the worst bites I've ever had. I'll never forget it. It took forever to get that thing off. I mean, it must have hung on for a good 5 minutes, and it mangled the shit out of me. And I was I'll never do that again. So it's not a good idea to stick your hand down a hole where there's a tokay gecko.
Yeah, poke a stick down there first and see if it hits the stick.
Yeah. I think that's what we'll say right here on the Monitor Keeping Podcast is venomous animals, croc monitors, tokay geckos.
Yeah, no, it's that dog bite, that lockjaw that they're able to do, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, some of the monitors will do it to you too. You probably experienced that bulldog, the 5 to 10 minute bulldog where it's like you're hanging them back in their cage. Please let go. And they look at you.
Bite harder.
Yeah, they look at directly in your eyes, and they close their eyes and bite down harder.
Yep.
And
many times.
Yeah.
Many times. Yeah.
Oh. But,
hey,
go ahead.
I had a question. No, just trying to get this in before we close up here in a bit. But I actually saved this question for last, and hopefully we can get to it sort of in depthly. But how do you introduce, or because you've had experience doing quite a range of animals, how do you introduce mean animals to each other, or somewhat either hard or apprehensive to the whole, getting to breeding and all that stuff like that? I myself, for context, my mangroves, Varanus indicus, are great, but my Varanus coli, not so great. And they may be okay with me, but they're horrible introducing to each other. I know all of them are wild caught. I got them all from Michael Cole, all raised up by him and everything like that. They're pretty spectacular animals. But the male, I don't know. He's bred with indicus before, but he won't breed with his own kind, and they're all over him. And I'm really trying to learn as many methods as I can to apply. So if I can pick your brain on that.
Yeah, I mean,
I currently have cage partitions, let them learn each other. I'm trying to do where I'm currently at is I used to do just introduction into cages, and then I would do like swapping of fecal matter or cage material, things like that. Mutual zoning, I've done that. Now I'm having cage partitions be applied into their setup, and then letting them, have weeks and weeks or months of somewhat of learning each other. But still, that male, he's wild, boy.
So, I mean, honestly, the way I deal with all of that, and we have, I don't even know how many, but we've got a ton of blue tongue skinks. Like we have all the morphs and shit. They're notoriously hard to introduce. We keep them all in pairs year round. They're set up in pairs. I generally try to set all the stuff up when it's babies. I raise them in small groups or in pairs together. As soon as they're sexable. If I do groups, and I'll, start busting them out. I try to keep, but everything here for the most part is kept in pairs with a few exceptions. One is the Mertens, because we have 2.3. The Mertens live in one large enclosure together all together. The Ackies are like 2.5 in together, and again, a large enclosure. And the Spencers are in a 1.3. But my primary mode, even with stuff that's aggressive, is I generally put them together, let them work it out. If they get too aggressive, I'll split them up, and then I'll wait a little while and try again later. But I keep trying until I get them to gel. Once I get them to gel, then I do not ever interfere. And that the thing is that sometimes it can take years.
Yeah.
For it to happen. And I've noticed over time, I used to do a lot of the stuff that you were talking about. Like I would give them a few months or, and I'd say, okay, it's not working, and I do something. But the problem is that every time you do
Change.
something, you're kind of resetting the thing.
Right.
And so the whole process starts all over again for them. So sometimes you can hit it, right? You can get lucky. You can make the right change, and then boom, but more often than not, I personally feel like it ends up working against you. And so now I've just gotten to the point, and I used to think of it as being lazy, right? I was like, oh, that's just throwing them together and forget it. But over time, I found that really does kind of is the magic thing. It's just kind of put them in there and then accept that, maybe they'll go in a year, maybe it'll be 2 years. Most of the time though, by 3 years, so about 36 months out, then they kind of click, and then everything goes. But I noticed it particularly a lot when we were moved. Like I said, we moved every year for 3 years. So every time they had different enclosures, different setups, and for everything here. And it was just a fucking nightmare, because I would move and then I have to reset it up, and then like all the anoles don't take moving at all. They're just like, you move them one time to a new location, they're like, fuck you, I'm done for, and it'll take an entire year for them to kind of get back online. And actually this time it took 2 years, and they finally clicked. So a project that I was working on since 2013 that should have been to market by 2015, 2016 was set back until 2021 because of moving. And then prior to that, I got a divorce. So then I moved again. So actually I moved 4 times since 2016, and it took everything and set it all back 7 years or so, or 4 years, 5 years. So
it's good to know, because it's like giving, you don't want to give up. You obviously don't want to push and harm the animals, especially the girls either, right? I myself have done and doing what you're sort of just recommending now, actually getting into it where nothing's really working. Let me just see what's the female that he'll chase and beat up less and put her in there. And
Yeah.
like he's bit her a couple times, even like after the introduction, and he's not really maimed her though. Like he's done a couple of the other girls where like he'll almost break the back of the end of their tail off. You know what I mean? Or he'll literally yank them out of a hollow because that's how like crazy he can be. Um, but this girl he slept with, he'll let sleep in the same log sometimes, but then all of a sudden randomly he'll bite her and then she'll go off. And then that's basically, I think she's just encroaching on his space and he's not really with all that just yet, the females, they're actually not too bad. It's the male. The male, he was imported as a adult. So he came here, already realizing what the wild was, what it is.
Yeah.
And he doesn't really like life too much. I do have to take away some of his hides just to get him to be interactive somewhat. He's stricken to one log that I can kind of work in and out of. So I still get to interact with him, but put 5 logs in there, you'll never see that guy,
I mean, that may be what you actually have to do, though.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes forcing it out, or giving it less opportunity might actually be causing. I've noticed. So here's an example. Okay, this is probably one that a lot of people don't know, but a big problem when you're commercially raising bearded dragons is that they nip. Right. If you go to pet stores, you'll see nipped dragons. Right.
Yeah.
Well, a few years ago, like 2012 or so, I was producing a lot of them, and I was about 10 to 15, maybe even 20% of them every year were getting nipped. And that's a huge problem when you're talking about thousands of baby dragons.
Right.
And they're not sellable really at that point, except as B grades to some pet stores that'll be able to find homes for them and stuff. So it's a huge problem. Right. And then one day I was flipping through this magazine, travel magazine that my ex-wife just had sitting around. And there was a picture of it was about Australia, and there was a picture of like a cattle fence, and there was these like dried up weeds at the base of this fence, and on top of the weeds were baby hatchling bearded dragons, Viticeps. And I looked at that and I thought, son of a bitch. So my thought process when I saw that was, I had seen that in green iguanas in the wild in Florida. Like when you catch baby green iguanas, you find them all clumped up. They hatch, they go within these weeds, and then you'll go by and you'll find a big weed that'll have like 20 baby iguanas all on it, right? And they're super easy to catch when that happens. So I thought, bearded dragons clearly do a similar thing. And at the time, and this is the way most people keep them today. When bearded dragon clutch hatch, they put 20 dragons in a tub with a rock to bask on, and that's it. So what happens? So when I saw that, I thought, okay, I'm going to go make, I'm going to take a bunch of like little branches and make like this ball. I used to call it the tumbleweed. So I take a whole bunch of oak branches, I jam them together, make them all stick into this big ball that had like hundreds of little tiny sticks all sticking out. And I put it in with each bearded dragon enclosure and put 20 babies in it. And I never got it virtually put the nips to 0.
Love it.
And what it was is that when you were basically forcing baby dragons on the ground, they were getting nervous and stressed. They would try to stack up on top of each other in a vain attempt to try to get to any kind of little, because they want to naturally crawl up into these little sticks where they each have their own little stick, and they're not. So if you notice when you go into a pet store and they've got a bunch of dragons, they're all stacked up on top of each other, but they're not stacking on top of each other. Everybody's, they're trying to get to the best heat source. No, that's not what they're doing. They're actually trying to get to the highest point. Yeah. They want their own little stick. So they're trying to use each other as a stick. And when you fix that problem, they no longer have that nervous tick, because I noticed that basically the fix for not having the nip everybody was doing, and they still do to this day, is they stuff them with food 3, 4, 5 times a day, right?
Makes them hungry.
Correct. Well, yeah. So they keep them well fed, and so they're constantly in a state of trying to burn that off. So they're not actually active. When they start nipping, though, is when they get active. So if you're not feeding them and they go into active mode, then it sets off this like nervous tick, and they start just nipping at each other. They're not doing it because they're hungry. It's more like a nervous twitch. Because as soon as I installed those tumbleweed things, I only needed to feed the baby bearded dragons once a day, like you would normally feed everything else. No nips. The dragons look good. I wasn't having it. Fixed all of the problems, and it was just a stupid picture that I saw in a travel magazine.
That's amazing. Yeah.
For my I was having issues with the grasshoppers for years, where I wasn't able to really get them to look like there was the structural integrity of them was very poor at the end result. Missing legs, poor wing shaped, all that stuff, right? And so you can't really sell that. You can't breed that. You can't do much with that other than to feed it off. It's now just consuming, wasting food and energy rather than anything else, right?
Right.
That's a cost of goods and everything like that. So now what I do now is exactly what you got, like with the bearded dragons, and I do something very similar. When I saw this picture of grasshoppers by a fence, and the grass was just really tall, and there was a bunch of them, right?
Yep.
And every straw had a couple grasshoppers on it.
Yep.
And what I was doing at home, I was just having somewhat similar levels, but they were all piled underneath the lamp. And so when they would do the locust thing and eat, they'd basically be nipping each other as well.
Yep.
But then what I did was I took chicken wire and metal fencing and basically maximized my surface usage. Now every grasshopper has their own little branch or bar on the chicken wire or hardwire cloth or whatever I wanted to use, and they're all next to each other but separate. And that's what helped me raise my grasshoppers with full integrity of the shape and the whole look of the animal, And it's crazy how you mentioned that, because I just looked on this picture online, and I was like, oh, that's kind of what I think I have to do. But how am I going to put grass in the cage? Well, obviously I'm not going to put grass. And then I thought about using bamboo, and bamboo wasn't really going to work. And then I was like, all right, this metal fencing is going to have to work. It's going to give the same application that what the twigs are doing,
Yeah, exactly. It's not hang on one second. The dog came to here you go. Yeah, it's not necessary to get it exact. You just have to get in the ballpark,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And just like that, my point was when you're describing what's going on with that particular monitor, it sounds to me it's probably, imports are tough, man. First of all,
Right.
I mean, I knew who you were because of the Indicus thing. So I knew you were the Indicus guy. So I knew you. I think you're one of the only people that's ever actually bred them, right?
There's probably a handful, but not really consistent like how I have been. And I've also been able to take a parthenogenic one and put it back to the mom to actually produce more viable babies too. So that also some extensive work with the project within a project within another project. Yeah,
that's cool, because that's a pretty big achievement, man. Even though they import them, those are a tough monitor. I mean, almost no one's ever done it.
Yeah,
that's very noteworthy. That's I had heard about that.
I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. But what I think you're running into then is
him being scared.
Yeah, it's that sounds like, I'm just.
No, you're right. It's because whenever there's a change, he's frantic, and then basically sets off, doesn't really eat from tongs for a few days or a few weeks. I got to kind of just set food out there, let him kind of get the gist. Though I'm not going to kill you or do anything bad to you anymore. I promise. Type deal.
Yeah.
And really get his confidence back. Now that I've put the logs back in there a little bit and put the female, kind of let them do their own thing, he's not so bad anymore, right? It's still only when he's at the entrance of the burrow, she'll come by and bam, it's like something like that, you know. And I think she's encroaching on his space, and so there's a couple things that I have in mind, but I really can't keep her from him or them from each other while they're in the space. So just giving them more hides from each other is all I really am able to do, you know.
Yeah.
At this point, yeah.
And that may be all you need to do.
Yeah. Because my fingers are crossed, and I really don't want to give up, you know. And at the same time, it's like it's like borderline dangerous for the female if I keep going, you know. So it's like, all right, I got to take a break. You know, there's some pressure a little bit on me, but at the same time, I have to actually drop that pressure from, you know, just the hobby itself, people wanting them, things like that. And I actually just have to get back to these animals, get back to just taking the time, not having, I'm going to try to breed them by 2022 or something like that. You know, really, really take my time with it. And like it took 7 years for Indicus, it's probably going to take quite a few years for Coli as well. Maybe not so much because I've already gotten into the ballpark of learning what to do, but still, it's like a whole nother animal, you know.
I wonder if you did your introductions or whatnot at lower temperatures, or if you.
Yeah, that's another idea.
Yeah, I'm actually trying now with just one lamp on rather than having it fully blown, all like. And that's what I'm going to do when it comes wintertime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so, we're getting around that 2 hour mark.
Man, I got like a light bulb in my head just that now as we're finishing this up. So I really appreciate you, Ron. You know, like, didn't think it was going to go this great with the deep conversation that we're having. You know, it's not just how do you breed them, what'd you do, you know, things like that, but really, really like the core of what you're getting and how you're thinking about things.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, that I personally feel like that's the most important part. It's just critical thinking and kind of, you know, learn the basic parameters and then do your own thing. I don't really take blueprints from anybody. Like I'll read their stuff and I'll say, okay, this guy did this and this is why he did it, but I don't copy anything, right? I've never actually done that because I tried that early on and it just
fail sometimes.
Yeah. It just never seemed. I was like, well, you know, this doesn't really work in my situation. And so over time, you know, I started to figure out, hey, really the way to do this is just to stop. Everybody gets tunnel vision and you just got to back up and look at the whole thing. You need to change it. If you're banging your head against the wall, change your perspective. It's amazing what that will do. And you just got to force yourself to do it. So it's probably easier said than done, but
all across the board.
It's,
right.
You know, it's great.
We'd love to have you back on, maybe in the future after a season. Yeah, believe me, you'll be hearing from me when you post pictures, one way or the other, whether it's podcast or just the list of tire kickers. Put me up there on that one.
Yeah, listen, guys. Anytime you want me to come on here and run my mouth for a couple hours, just let me know. I'm always available. So
good to know. Well, best of luck with everything you got going on, and with this, you know, craziness and all the weather that happens. I hope you stay safe.
Stay safe out there.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. It was good to finally meet you two. I've heard about both of you in the past. Like, Alan and I have a mutual friend that I think was it Ryan Johnson that was telling me about you? Somebody I was talking to recently was like, it was Jeff Godbold. That's who it was.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah. Jeff was like telling me about you the other day, and so that's cool. And then Kai is like legendary for the Indicus thing, so
thank you.
That's
Kai.
That's cool. I pay attention, man. I watch, dude. I'm as big a fan of like so many people that do this. Anybody that does anything that's cool, you know, like you're working on those netted dragons, all that kind of shit. That's fucking awesome, and that's what this hobby needs more of. So I pay attention to all that, and I watch it all through Facebook and live vicariously through all you guys.
I do the same thing with everybody else keeping this stuff online.
Well, man, thanks for coming on this evening and everything like that. You know, everything that you do for the hobby as well. You know, I actually was kind of, you know, we're like starstruck almost trying to figure out the right questions to ask without, not trying to sound like a teeny bopper or some type of
that's totally unwarranted, but I appreciate it.
So some type of groupie, but I was nervous about asking the questions that would just be perfect for the show.
Yeah. That's cool, guys. I really appreciate it, but I'm just a fucking jackass that breathes it. So. That's all it is. So.
Good stuff. All right, we'll wrap it up. I just want to say thank you to the NPR network, and go on their website, guys. To our listeners, ReliaPythonRadio.com or .net will get you there. Check out their site. Check out the other podcasts. Anything you're interested in, just like we're talking about, all the different reptiles out there. If you got an interest, something sparks your interest. They have plenty of material. A couple new podcasts have popped up. The list is getting so long, it's almost incredible to name them all. And I think we just need to do a generic end of show, little recording for all the podcasts for all of us across the board. But pretty much anything you're into, some of the great minds out there are talking about, or they're guests on the show. And it's a wonderful source of information. But I would also suggest getting on board with USARK, as they are fighting to keep our reptile rights alive. Pretty much the only organization doing that and assisting us in that. And then on the NPR website, also check out their Patreon if you like hearing these podcasts and you want to support. I don't think there's any other sponsors, anything else on any of the podcasts. So it's kind of Eric just doing this whole thing. So if you want to get on there and support him, please do, and help us to help him to keep getting this good information out and have some fun. So, all right, guys, till next time.
Hey, thanks, Ron. Have a good one.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys.